Welcome to the Love of the Star podcast. I am Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider for 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, joined as always by Brian Broaddus, former Super Bowl winning NFL scout, now the co-host of the G-Bag Nation, 2 to 7 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday on 105.3 The Fan, as well as the pre- and post-game co-host on the Dallas Cowboys radio network. And Brian, I have a feeling this is going to be your favorite podcast we've ever done, because I'm having to do this out of my hotel room in Tampa, which is with the team. And so I'm having much quieter than normal.
Yeah.
So
I just can't wait till I get that text message from somebody that's either across the hall from you or next door and saying, God, that Bobby Belt sure is loud. I mean, so I don't know. I mean,
I'm trying to be reasonable. I'm sitting here. It's a beautiful hotel room. As you can see, I was clearly on the charter. I have a damn button down, like I've got an actual button down shirt on with a collar. I'm not doing that unless I'm absolutely forced to. And there is a dress code when you get on the charter. But Brian, before we dive into the Cowboys Tampa talk, which by the time this airs Monday morning, we will be just a little bit away from the Cowboys kicking off in their playoff game. As I look over at the television screen right now, Brian, there's 11-11 left in the fourth quarter, and it is 24-24 between the Giants and Vikings. So with that in mind, knowing we don't know the result of that, any big impressions from the weekend of playoff football?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, there's some, you saw what San Francisco is capable of. That game was very close at half. You kind of felt like that maybe Seattle was going to find a way to hang in there, and just too much firepower at San Francisco. And I believe that's why everybody who is in the playoffs or, fans of these teams want nothing to do, especially Cowboy fans really want nothing to do with the 49ers when you start to see their ability. Brock Purdy has played really, really well. And you knew that was going to happen if you follow along with 105.3 The Fan and our stuff in the draft show and all that. We've always talked about a Brock Purdy and what he did at Iowa State. Iowa State, you look at since he's gone, Iowa State kind of reverted back to Iowa State, 20 years ago. And so I'm super impressed with San Francisco, as everybody was. I was super impressed with the way the Dolphins hung in with Buffalo today. And Buffalo's quarterback, let's be honest. I know on Twitter, I was answering questions earlier this morning about, who had more pressure on him. And everybody's like, no, it's Dak, it's Dak, it's Dak. It's like, no, it's Josh Allen. Josh Allen was the one who was going to be, was preseason MVP. And this was a team that was going to the Super Bowl and all that. But great job by the Dolphins hanging in there. They didn't get the result they wanted. You mentioned, this Giants Minnesota game. Both teams are super comfortable playing in the fourth quarter. And it's going to come down to, if the Giants find a way to win this game, then they travel to San Francisco and you'll go to Philadelphia if, in fact, you win this game. A lot on the line, but like I said, both teams in that Minnesota Giants game, they play very tight games. Both teams have negative point differentials going in. I think it was the fourth time that's happened in league history. Just crazy to think this, but I think you can honestly flip a coin in that game. And, by the time we're done with this, maybe we'll have an idea what direction they're going.
Yeah. By the time we wrap up, I would hope we'll have an answer as to which direction they're going. I got to say that as it stands right now, for me, I would much rather go to Philly next week than San Francisco. I'd rather play the Eagles right now than play the 49ers. The 49ers are just an incredibly difficult matchup. Although, they've shown that they tighten up in the second half, but they've shown in the last few weeks they'll give up some big passing plays. They're becoming a little vulnerable there in getting hit with some of those chunk plays. So either way, though, I don't think that's a great matchup for them, for Dallas and San Francisco. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We do have to actually worry about
win a playoff game. Yeah.
Yep. Winning the first road playoff game since January 1993, when the Cowboys went to Candlestick Park and beat the 49ers on the way to their first Super Bowl victory over the Buffalo Bills. Brian, what we're going to do today, we're going to steal from our buddies over at the KNC Masterpiece. Kevin Hagelin, Corey Majors, Mike Bassick, who do a great job on 105 Through the Fan with us. They've got a segment every week called Cowboys Win Because and Cowboys Lose Because. And just basically outline, hey, if they win, this is probably why. If they lose, this is probably why. So we're going to discuss some of that here in the in these two segments before we get to the mailbag. And the first one I want to tackle is Cowboys Win Because. And Brian, when you look at this matchup, what is the big? What's the one or two big things you think we'll be talking about coming out of this game if the Cowboys win it?
There's a couple different areas, and I do want to get your opinion on this too. So I want to leave enough time for you to have your say as well. Being that we're in the playoffs here, I feel like I talk way too much during this thing, but I want you to have an opinion as well. And
Brian, if ever you worry that you're taking up too much time, just flash me your Super Bowl ring and I'll shut up.
It's not that easy. I think this game's going to come down to a couple different spots. Are you going to be able to handle these Buccaneer receivers? And especially, I'm not just saying at the left cornerback spot. We've seen Diggs have some issues too on some double move stuff. We've seen some inside breaking routes that have given him problems. We've seen him lose some guys. If you watch the all 22 every week, there's times where he'll lose guys and the ball doesn't go his direction. So yeah. I kind of feel like this, for the Cowboys to win this game, they have got to be on the screws when it comes to their secondary. And they'll have an opportunity, I think, to get pass rush. I do. I feel like that, we'll see with Jensen. I'm hearing whispers out of Tampa that Jensen, the center who hasn't gone all year, is going to likely start in this game. But
Mike McCarthy told us on 105 Through the Fan that's what they were game planning for.
Yeah, and they should. And now the other side of that is, with Donovan Smith, and how do you attack Donovan Smith? And the Buccaneers are terrified of anybody that lines up opposite Donovan Smith, especially the pass rushers the Cowboys have. So that could be a very, very good positive. With the Cowboys, I do worry about the secondary, and it's not just the left cornerback spot. We'll see what they got in Xavier Rhodes. You need Xavier Rhodes to be great in one football game. You really, really need him to be great in this football game. And, he's a long guy. He's a physical guy. He's got some toughness to him. He just doesn't run as well as he once did, and maybe that's okay. You shade Hooker to his side. You figure out, you bracket the opposite. If it's Godwin, you want to bracket. If it's Diggs, me personally, I travel Diggs with both these guys. I kind of mix it up a little bit. Don't let the Buccaneers get a real feel for how you're playing Diggs in this game. Yeah. But to me, a lot of this is going to come down to their ability to play in the secondary. On the other end of that, though, on offensively, though, I just feel like that they got to get that Hall of Fame performance from Tyron Smith at right tackle.
Yeah.
I think they're going to need to lean on Vita Vea, and I mean lean on him with Martin and Smith, and they can't let these linebackers run to the ball free. They've got to get guys up. So it's not just, I don't think it's the game plan from 2 years ago to just throw the ball every snap and hope for the best. I feel like they're going to have to find a way to gain some positive yards running the football. Now, I know it's probably, first down runs or seem to be a nightmare for Cowboy fans that we're living through right now, but they're going to have to find a way to control the inside triangle, the nose tackles, the defensive tackle, those linebackers inside. They can't let those guys wreck shop in this game offensively. So it's going to come on the secondary, and I think it's going to come on the offensive line.
Well, as you were talking just there, we got a Saquon Barkley touchdown with 7 minutes left in the game there. So Giants up 30-24 pending the extra point, which obviously everybody's going to know the result in the morning, but I'm letting Brian know because we're sitting here having a broadcast during it. Brian, it's interesting. I think you mentioned the Tyron Smith thing. That's huge. To me, I think the vulnerability at that second corner spot or third, however you want to call it, because Bland in the base package is the other corner. But that other corner spot outside of Bland and Diggs, I think, is what very well may take them out in this playoffs if they're not able to get a steady performance there. But I'll go with the obvious one, which is if the Cowboys win this game, I think it's because Dak and the offense wins the turnover battle, whether it be just by not having any or limiting them enough that if the defense is able to scoop up a few, you'll be able to have a good day. This year, when the Cowboys won the turnover battle, they're 7-1. The only game they lost was to Jacksonville, and that was a game they realistically should have won. And so I think when you look at how much turnovers have dictated whether the Cowboys have success or not in this season, I think that it's easy to look at that and say, let's try and limit these. And look, it's easier to say, it's easier said than done. This is a team that took a year and a half to fix penalties. It was something that we talked about almost every week for essentially 18 months was what are you guys doing here? How are you going to fix this? What's going to happen here? And they never seemed to get a hold on it. I know we had talked about you're just always going to have to deal with the penalties. And now that they've corrected them, it kind of coincided with this real strong increase in turning the ball over. And so it's something that now that's the thing that you're worrying about and having to correct. And, it doesn't help when you get 7 of Dak's interceptions that are graded as non-interceptable throws, meaning they were on a receiver or whatever else. But that still means he threw 8. That means he threw 8 in a short amount of time, and we're not used to him turning the ball over like that. And so, Brian, knowing that that's going to be such a huge key in this game is Dak's, and the offense in general not turning the ball over. What's the balance between the aggressiveness you likely need to play with in order to win this game while also not playing reckless? Like is aggressiveness without recklessness really possible?
Boy, I'm having a hard time with that one, Bobby, because I just don't see this quarterback all of a sudden flipping the switch and becoming this ultra conservative. I think that Dak Prescott, it's in his DNA that, and I'm not saying the turnovers are in his DNA. By the way, those interceptions that he has, how many have been pick sixes or how many have ended up being
3?
Yeah. So
3, and it's been 3 in the last 5 weeks. So it's really prominent. I think
it just feels like it's 15. But I honestly, I know when those penalties were all starting, I was like going, just get used to it. The officials are going to call it. Dallas is going to be penalized. It's not going to change. Well, averaging some games, so they had 3 and 4 penalties. And, I'll say this about the penalties real quick. Dallas needs to draw some of those holding calls if they can. Early in the year, they were doing a really good job with their pass rush of forcing opponents into holding calls. I can't remember the last time we've seen a holding call in a game. I'm sure there is. I'm sure somebody out there, well, damn, brought us last week against the Commanders, but I just don't remember it as it seemed like to me the Cowboys were putting opponents into negative situations, and rushing the passer with, and let's be, I think the numbers will tell you that the Buccaneers are one of the worst teams in the league when it comes to 3rd and long. So, if you can get them in some negative yardage situations, because Brady, he's not going to just throw it up and hope for the best. He'll check it down and they'll get, if it's 3rd and 18, he'll get 8 and then they'll punt the ball kind of a thing. But to your question, I just don't think all of a sudden we're getting the playoffs and this is going to flip. I think the thing that I just worry about the reckless Dak. And reckless in a way of maybe it's not reckless. Maybe it's, I'm not seeing this the right way, or maybe didn't see this guy and I'm now making a throw. I don't need the Dak being pulled down and just flinging the ball into an area guy.
Yeah.
I don't need Dak off his back foot with pressure in his face, just throwing the ball out in the flat into triple coverage and Antoine Winfield is standing right there. You know what I'm saying? I don't need that. And I hate to say this, but he gets in these games and it's going to happen. And I don't know what you could do to prevent that. I just don't, because he's not going to give up on a play. He's going to think a guy's open and he's probably not open. And, he's not going to live to fight for another day. And maybe I'm willing this into existence like I did the penalty thing, but I just don't see all of a sudden we get to Raymond James Stadium on Monday night and everything is completely different. You've won games with him having a good stat line with completions and attempts and yards and touchdowns, and also had 2 picks. You've won games with him turning the ball over. I just don't know if you want to do that in the playoffs.
Here's a fun fact for you. I had to go look it up, Brian. Once you mentioned it, I had to go look. When was the last time you think an opponent was called for offensive holding, an opposing offensive lineman? So not a receiver on the edge or something, but somebody in the trenches flagged for holding against Dallas.
Well, let me ask you a question. Am I right? It hasn't been a while, right?
It's been a while.
Okay. I'm going to go with Green Bay. The Green Bay game is what I'm going to go with.
Nailed it. Third quarter of the Green Bay game.
Yeah.
So we're talking about basically the last half of the season. They didn't generate any offensive holding calls on opposing offensive linemen. Now, there were some against running backs. Like the most recent offensive holding call was against Tennessee. Traylon Burks got flagged for it, but it's different. We're talking about trench play here.
Yeah.
And the Cowboys are not generating any of that. Do you think that's something that's surely something that the Cowboys talk to the league about? I know teams routinely are in communication with the league office about, hey, can we get an eye on this? Can we have something, can we make sure we're addressing this over here?
Well, you get to see every game live, and I get to see 8 of them live during the season. And it seems like to me that Micah Parsons can't catch a break on some of this, or, Tank Lawrence can't catch a break. But that's, sometimes when you get in a game where the officials aren't calling penalties against you, they're not calling penalties for you either. They're letting both teams play. And me personally, I just know when the Cowboys get somebody in a negative yardage situation. Now, they have to be alert for this team will throw a screen, to a running back. They'll throw it to Fournette. They'll throw it to White. And if it's 3rd and 18, I mean, how many times they've thrown a screen, you're like, oh, damn, they're about to pick this thing up, and it's 3 yards short. You're like, oh, my God. But, that's the thing about it. It's just that Tampa is not a good 3rd and long team. And I don't know if you could sack Tom Brady. I'll tell you what, the one thing I know about Craig Walderstead, the official for the game Monday night, he's only called 4 roughing the passing penalties this year. Okay. And everybody says, well, it's Tom Brady. You're going to get some, calls because it's Tom Brady. I kind of feel like these officials that if they don't call it during the year, they're not going to all of a sudden call it in a playoff game. I just don't. Now, I could be wrong, and everybody's going to come attack me for, oh, there you go, Broadus, you said it and all that. But, if it's me, if I'm close enough to take a clean shot at Tom Brady, I'm taking clean shots. I'm not hitting him in the head. I'm not hitting hands to the face. I'm not going low in the back of his legs. But I'm taking some shots. I'm bumping him around and letting him know the pass rush is close. I can't tell you how many times, and it doesn't happen often, but I mean, I'm just telling you this. When you watch Brady lose a football game, that jersey has grass stains all over it.
Right.
That gets to him. That man's 45 years old, still playing at a high level, but you knock him around a bunch. I saw Cincinnati do it in the second half of their game. Saw San Francisco do it in their 35-7 win. You knock him around, it's a different scenario for him playing that way.
And again, I also had to go look it up, Brian. Since the Cowboys last got an offensive holding call against an opposing offensive lineman, the Cowboys themselves, their offensive linemen have been flagged 9 times for offensive holding. So we're on quite a streak here. You're listening to the Love of the Star podcast, the Love of the Stars and Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, we've talked about the things Dallas can do to win this game, or the things that we think will matter. And I know it's easy to just flip it around and say, well, if that doesn't happen, they lose. But just some particulars that you look at. What do you think are going to be some of the keys that if the Cowboys lose, we're looking at on Tuesday and saying, man, this happened or this happened and this really cost them.
Yeah, the chunk plays. I mean, they offensively don't make chunk plays, and Tampa all of a sudden is getting you on chunk plays. I'll give you something else. You lose the special teams battle in this game. If you get the Turpin muff punt, you get him bringing a kickoff out of the end zone, and you end up on the 12-yard line, and all of a sudden you're having to punt deep in your own end of the field. Those are the kinds of things you can't have a drop snap. You can't have a snap that rolls on the ground, basically, like it happened last week against the Commanders on the missed extra point. You can't have that, man. Overton, the center, you can't snap the ball wide on the punt. I mean, I know the guy dropped it, but my God, put it belt high, let him catch the ball, and let him get rid of the punt. But you cannot lose that special teams aspect of it. You can't give up big returns. You can't muff punts, and you can't bring the ball back to the 12-yard line on a kickoff return when you should just kneeled it and brought it back at the 25.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. They're specifically highlighting the special teams aspect because the Cowboys are coming off their worst special teams performance of the year against Washington. I mean, a lot of people are coming off their worst performance of the year against Washington. And like I said, it's easy to just flip it around and say, I said the key to winning this game, Cowboys win the turnover battle. So obviously, if they don't win the turnover battle, that's a problem. But here's what I'm anticipating. I think this is going to be a close game. I think we're going to be looking at this where it very well could be the ball is in Dak's hands and there's a chance to go win the game, or the ball is in Brady's hands and there's a chance to go win the game, whatever it may be. So I feel like if the Cowboys end up losing this game, one of the things we'll be talking about outside of just the penalties and those sorts of obvious things, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is game management.
Yeah.
Because I think management's going to be huge in this one.
I agree.
You can't have a silly challenge that costs you a timeout and then you're sitting there at the end of the game going, man, it'd be nice to be able to stop the clock right here. You can't have, somebody didn't line up correctly, had to call a timeout, or the play clock got away from us, or even on a closing drive. I don't want to stir up bad feelings, but like you can't call a draw play on, with 14 seconds left and you have no timeouts. And so to me, I look at that a big part of this game, I feel like if they lose, one of the things that we'll discuss the next day is, man, this went wrong in the game management, whether it be from Dak Prescott, Kellen Moore, or Mike McCarthy, that this was mismanaged and that really cost the Cowboys a chance to, head into the divisional round.
Yeah, that's Jerry Jones came out on 105.3 The Fan and was talking about, that Mike really wasn't coaching for his job. And, but if you have something that is just so egregious where you're like, gosh, that's pretty simplistic. You should have done this, the whole thing with Jacksonville and not making them burn timeouts and play calling and stuff like that. I mean, this has to be a clean game from that aspect. You can't burn timeouts. You can't burn a challenge. You can't burn things that's going to cost you an opportunity. You have to, playoff games have to be managed correctly. You just can't do that. And we saw a pretty good example last night in Jacksonville, or on Saturday night in Jacksonville, where, the Chargers and, just, not being able to finish that game, and ultimately it costs you. So, that's the thing you always worry about in these playoff games. Teams that get huge leads and you don't manage the game well enough, and then all of a sudden the other team comes roaring back in the game and you find a way to lose at the end. That's what happened to the Chargers on Saturday night. If that happens to you on Monday night, there is going to be some serious discussions this coming week about the coaching staff and the direction that they're going.
Yeah, I think that's, I know Jerry said, like you mentioned, job is safe. There's nothing to worry about. But that just means that that's how he felt on it last Tuesday. If we head into this Tuesday, I think it could look very different. There are a couple different things that I think we've heard Jerry say recently that were pretty interesting. After the Washington game, he said, look, I'm disappointed in this game, but not half as disappointed as I'll be if we're in the same spot next week. And then you had after when we got a chance to interview him on 105 Through the Fan, we asked him about what his message would be to the team to remember about last year's game against San Francisco, and he said, "Remember that it's going to be a much happier new year. We can all have a happier new year if we win." Now, obviously, that could just be positivity, but I think there's also a point of that says it's not going to be happy for some people if we lose this game. That we need results. I mean, Mike McCarthy was not brought in here to just be better than Jason Garrett in the regular season. He was brought in here to make a difference in the playoffs. And so this is an opportunity for him to make a difference in the playoffs. And look, I think that, I don't know how you feel about this, Brian. I feel like Dallas is the better football team. And so I think that if they lose this game, it's because of things that they did to themselves. Dak has a silly turnover. There's just a lack of focus, or there's some issue in the secondary, or you have a procedural issue, some sort of game management issue. That's what I think ultimately could really cost this game, more so than Tom Brady turning back the clock. Now, you always have to worry about Tom Brady, and until he is just no longer on a football field, I'm gonna have concerns that he's gonna run the ball right down the field. I mean, he's had a few really late game comebacks this year, sort of vintage Tom Brady style that you still see. He's that guy. And so for me, I think a big part of this is the procedural issue, obviously, but also there's got to be, in terms of game management, Kellen Moore's got to be better drawing things up. And I would love to think that it was just a vanilla game plan he was running out there against Washington. We're on about a month now of some what feels like questionable calls. This is the way I look at it, Brian, and I don't know if you agree with this. There doesn't seem to be what Kellen Moore has in X's and O's and play design. And I think he's very good at it. I think he lacks in feel for the tenor of the game and where the game is heading and those sorts of things. I just feel like he looks at it very, as ones and zeros, and he just looks at it as like, here's what it is, and this is what we call here, and it's very almost like a calculator. And there's no sense for, man, we've really got them on the ropes, we need to do this, or man, this is happening here, we need to do this. It just seems like he calls things, he goes in there with a plan, and he's going to call it like that. And there's not going to be any adjustment based off of what he sees. And that would be a concern for me out of this game. I feel like that would be something we could be potentially talking about.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. It just, the last several weeks, it just feels like it's a struggle every single play. I mean, I remember that the final 2-minute drive against the Texans, and just how that just so beautifully flowed, and a run, a pass, a run, a pass. I mean, it was just beautifully executed to get the points. And as of late, it just seems like it's just such a burden to even get 2-3 yards. It's a fight, and
Yeah.
Hey, the team that made you look absolutely silly trying to run the football this year was the Commanders. They did it to you twice. They did it to you twice. And so, that this team can make you look silly trying to run the ball too, but it's not to the level, I think, of what we saw with the Commanders. And I don't know if it's to the level of what we saw with Tennessee, but they got to try. But just the flow and the beauty of the offense, it hasn't been there the last several weeks. You're right about that.
So as we look at this game, we just talked about how they could win because, how they could lose because, things like that. But in general, what is Brian Broaddus's prediction for this game? I'm looking at this game, and I think that this is something that, again, Dallas is a better football team, and I think that even though the Brady mystique is there, I think that it's secondary to just the talent disparity and the quality of the teams. And I think Dallas is going to be ready to play this game. I don't think you're going to have these sleepwalking issues or an inability to understand the gravity of the situation. So for me, I got Dallas winning this one 27-24.
Yeah, I went 27-23 on all my platforms I've been on. The Cowboys break. I know on when this is being aired on Monday, we'll predict our scores for the G-Bag Nation. And I'm 27-23 Dallas. I don't know why I'm getting fooled again. You know, the old Who song, you don't get fooled again. Well, I'm getting fooled again. I think you're right. I think Dallas is the better team. The thing that makes me nervous is, you know, when those defensive tackles have played together, this team's 6-1 for the Buccaneers, you know, and they and them are, you know, they're back together. They're back together. And so I that's got me a little bit nervous. But, you know, the Cowboys played so poorly last week. And Mike McCarthy talked about practice and all that stuff like that. You know, maybe it had something to do with what was going on in Buffalo. Seemed like
Sure.
everybody else handled that a lot better than the Cowboys did. But, you know, that was a game the Cowboys had to win to maybe win the division. And they came out horribly. So I hope the first quarter of that game is not one of these things where like, okay, here we go again, kind of a thing. They can't do anything offense. They're giving up chunk plays, but I'll get fooled again. 27-23 Dallas.
And we will know here shortly whether it is on to Philly or San Francisco.
Did the Giants just convert on a 4th and 1?
They went for it on a 4th and 1 on their own like 40, and they snuck it and they picked it up. But then on 3rd and 15 with Minnesota, no timeouts left, 3 minutes left in the game, Darius Slayton flat out dropped the ball, and now Brian Daboll's losing his mind at a pretty awful roughing the passer call that's going to benefit the Vikings pretty well. So 2 minutes left here. You guys already know what happened, but that's fine. You can live it with us as we experience who ends up winning this football game.
Just know if Giants win and you win, you're going to San Francisco. That's all you need to know right now.
Yeah. Regardless of if the Cowboys end up winning their football game, then Giants win, it's on to San Francisco. Vikings win, it's on to Philly. Which for me personally, right now, Brian, I prefer Philly. That's just where I come down. I prefer to play Philadelphia right now.
That quarterback's nicked up for them for sure.
You are listening to the Love of the Star podcast. The Love of the Star is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Brian, it is now time for the Dean Julia Love of the Star mailbag.
Wait a minute.
Julia City.
Yeah, you're in the Dean Julia mailbag city, right?
I am Tampa. We're supposed to meet up. I told him I'd meet up if the game came to Tampa. So he'll be here, and I'll make sure to have him record a video message to you, calling you out and challenging you for the fight you wanted to have with him a few weeks back. First question here in the mailbag.
It's not
Brian.
Me, it's you. It's like we have all these nice folks. Dean, he asks great questions. I'm just trying to get everybody else a question in there too.
First question here from Monique Riddick. Hey. How are you both feeling about the preparedness of the Cowboys for this game? I kind of mentioned it there at the end of the segment. I think there's zero chance the Cowboys come in here unprepared. I think they understand the magnitude of this. CeeDee Lamb had said at the end of last week's game, said, like, look, we got to understand, like, there's no margin for error. Like, you lose, you go home. And so I think that there's a sense of, okay, that was our wake-up call. Let's make sure we don't do that again. So in terms of preparedness, at least in terms of player focus, is the game plan the right one? Things like that, who knows? But in terms of player focus and how prepared they are for the magnitude of the game and who they're going up against, I think they're more than ready.
Yeah, I think they're ready, and I think they're extremely healthy. When you start to talk about Hankins, Van Der Esch, those guys coming back in the mix, I think that's a big plus for the Cowboys defense. They didn't have, the way that Tampa won this game in week 1 wasn't Tom Brady being a hero. It was Leonard Fournette running the football.
Yes.
And you didn't have Hankins in there playing. If they can control the middle, allow the linebackers to run, I mean, Clark, Van Der Esch, Wilson, these guys are going to have to play a huge game. I have a feeling, if it's deep down in his soul, I think Diggs is going to, when that ball comes his direction, he has got to come flying forward. Please don't give ground over there. Gave too much ground in week 1. Soft corner killed you in the game right there. So if you're Diggs, Wilson, Van Der Esch, Clark, Barr, if he gets opportunity, the edge, Armstrong, all those guys, you've got to hold the point of attack, and you've got to keep these running backs from getting to that edge.
Next question here from Brian and Cheryl Burkett. I believe that's a couple there that is tweeting at us. I have a question that has not really been answered. Why hasn't Dallas used Kavontae Turpin for deep passes? At TCU, he just sprinted deep, and the quarterback threw the ball as far as he could. He would run to it. Wouldn't doing that stretch the defense out more? Kavontae Turpin's very small, and I know that we've progressed past some size limitations in some ways, with quarterbacks and everything else. But it's very. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's probably 2, maybe 3 inches shorter than even Tyreek Hill. He's a smaller player, and it's tough to. As fast as you are, it's tough to get the ball around defenders like that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like if they're going, this is the game, and I'm gonna make the call on this one. And I was thinking, I was going to ask you this question because I asked it in my sports mix on Friday to my guys.
Mm-hmm.
I said, deep shot reception to Michael Gallup or interception from Bland. Which one you getting?
Which one do you get, or which one would I prefer?
Which one you getting? Which one do you think is going to hit? Deep shot Gallup, which we haven't seen that. We haven't seen
better shot of a Bland pick. Yeah. I think. I mean, Brady threw the ball damn near 800 times this year. Deron Bland has shown really good ball skills, has shown an ability to make a play on the ball, regardless of whether or not it's just thrown in his lap or not. We're still waiting on Gallup, and so for me, I think it's much more likely. If Vegas were going to put odds on it, I think the money would be on Deron Bland getting a pick.
Okay.
Next question here for our Dean Julia Love the Star mailbag from Kyle Stahl. Who are the candidates to replace Dan Quinn if he gets the Denver job? This is interesting because I think the obvious candidate might be Joe Witt, but Joe Witt may go with him. It may be the case. Now, if Joe Witt decides he wants to be a defensive coordinator, by the way, the Vikings just failed on 4th down, so it looks like the Giants are going to run out this clock and win the game against the Vikings. With 1:44 left and no timeouts, they just turn the ball over on downs. But Dan Quinn, he may take Joe Witt. But Joe Witt's got a long relationship with Mike McCarthy as well, has worked with him before this. And so, maybe it's the case where Joe Witt stays around and does that. Another name to watch, just because the Joneses obviously always have an affinity for him, is Mike Zimmer. I think that, Mike Zimmer's out there. That's somebody, or maybe George Edwards gets another crack to be a defensive coordinator. So those are just some of the names that I think you could look at. Brian, anybody you think of?
I think that if Joe Witt wants to stay around, that would be great, and that to kind of try and keep some continuity. I think maybe that Dan Quinn would take the defensive line coach. I think that with AD maybe going with him, and maybe he would be the defensive coordinator. We would see, maybe it's in title, but it could be that Dan calls the defense, and and AD is that in title. So I kind of feel like that. I think you got some good options, and I like what you're talking about with potentially with Mike Zimmer as well. And because I think guys like Mike Zimmer, George Edwards, I think those guys would stay on. Al Harris, they could kind of keep some continuity that way.
Next question here from @Kobe3. He's got 2 questions. Will CeeDee Lamb have 10+ targets in this game? And will T.Y. Hilton start? Brian, what do you think?
I think he'll have the targets, yes. I think he'll have over 10 targets. It depends on if they go 11 personnel, which I probably think my gut feeling would be they probably would not. So I'll say no on the T.Y. Hilton start and yes on the 10 targets.
I think I agree with you there. But I do think that T.Y. Hilton will have a serious hand in the game. Like I think that he's going to have a big role in the game plan. I don't necessarily think he's going to, get 15 targets or anything like that, but he's going to actively be involved in the routes that they're drawing up and the concepts that they're trying to push on Tampa Bay. There have been, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times this year that CeeDee Lamb has been targeted at least 10 times. Cowboys are 5-3 in those games. You definitely need a lot more production from CeeDee Lamb in this game than he got in week 1. But
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Brian. This is how I felt about it going back and watching it. Is there a player you feel like is more different from week 1 to now than CeeDee Lamb? Like, that looks like a different player to me when you watch the tape against Tampa.
Well, I would have said if he was still playing, I would have said Terrence Steele because he was.
Well, yeah, he was rough.
He was awful. He was awful in week 1. But yeah, to your point, absolutely right. I think that actually Tyler Smith has gotten to be a better player because of from what we saw in week 1 to what we have now. I think the experience along the way, all the starts he's made, I think has helped him. I think that Tyler Biotish at center is a different player than what we saw in week 1 to where we got right now.
Next question here from Garrett. Gut feeling, Brian, who has a bigger game, Micah Parsons or Dak Prescott?
I'm going to say I think they're teeing Micah Parsons up for a big game. So I'm going to say it's Micah Parsons. I'm going to say he's going to have several tackles, maybe a couple of tackles for loss. I could see some pressures. I could see some hits. I could see some sacks. Nothing against Dak. I kind of feel like that, how the quarterback goes is probably how you're going to either win or lose this game. But defensively, I think that they're going to tee him up and let him go. And so I could see him having a big game.
I've used this line a few times on the topic of Dak. I've said this a few times, and I don't know that I've ever gotten your feedback on it. So I'm curious if you have any disagreement with it or if you see it the same way. I've said pretty consistently over the last 6 weeks, I think if Dak and CeeDee Lamb are clicking, they will go far. If that connection isn't right, they lose. Yeah. Like to me, I think that ultimately whether they win or lose in large part is going to be determined by that. Now, obviously, they can't be giving up, chunk plays like they have. Cowboys lead the NFL. They've given up more 20-yard pass plays in the last 5 weeks of the season than anybody else in the NFL. And it feels like it. That's not a surprising number, I think. I think when you watch it, you go, yeah, that sounds about right. But in general, I think that the connection between Dak and CeeDee Lamb is going to be the X factor for the Cowboys and how far they go.
I totally agree.
That does it for us here on the Love of the Star podcast. As I just mentioned, and as you guys have known for several hours by the time you hear this, it is the Giants beating the Vikings 31-24. I'm undefeated so far this week, Brian. If I get a Cincinnati victory and a Dallas victory, I called all the games right. But the Cowboys, if they win this game, they will be heading to San Francisco, which will be that'll be a tough game for them. But maybe you want to get that out of the way now and catch. Maybe you want to cheer for the Giants to go in there and upset Philly and give you a home game.
That's what I'm saying, man. It's somehow, some way, it's set up that if you find a way to win the next 2 games. You never know. You might get that. They might get the NFC Championship game at home against the Giants. How wonderful would that be?
Cross those fingers. Until next time, we will talk to you guys later.